and the Mary Magdalene tradition represents something very exciting, which is the possibility. Does she represent the possibility of reconciliation between exoteric and esoteric forms of Christianity? I think she does, because if truth is what we're after, then truth is the possibility of that reconciliation. And then the Inquisitions and stuff can all go back in the cupboard. They're toys we no longer want to play with. This is the whole study of contemporary spiritual groups, feminist groups, some kind of neo-shamanic groups that are using her as their icon. It's a new religious movement, the contemporary Mary Magdalene work that's going on. And some of it, we can say it's bogus, it's new agey, it's almost commercial, but some I think is genuine. New age religious scholars need to study. Uta Hanegraaff's PhD thesis was on the New Age as a study in its own right, which is interesting. The whole phrase New Age is actually a Johannine phrase. It's in John's Gospel, and it's the new eon. And it's about a transformed consciousness. Sir George Trevelyan, who was one of my mentors in the anthroposophical movement, was he understood the wisdom behind the concept of the New Age, which is actually old age, it's eternal. We're talking about contacting eternity. So again, we need to turn these things on their head. The New Age is old age. And then number 41 is my most important of all. I'm a peace studies lover and scholar, and I'm interested in the Magdalene tradition because it may have something to say about peacemaking and non-violence and war. The Cathars, for all their, that conflict was a tragedy in the south of France. And it went on in other parts of Europe. And the whole persecution of the so-called heretic is, we need to grow out of that. And we need to find true peace, which is peace between... We all have an esoteric and an exoteric identity. We have separate selves. You have the public persona you play in the workplace, professionally, then you have the private one, And that's the peacemaking that needs to be done. The first paper I ever gave to a conference of philosophers of peace was about the rainbow spectrum of human personality and how we make peace between all of us. My work on the history of dialectical materialism versus Gnostic capitalism, it's interesting that in the history of European thought, the Cathars apparently didn't like matter. That was the war, and the Catholic Church wanted the embodiment of Christianity in matter in this world. And then in Marxism, we emphasized materialism becomes the only thing, and God gets thrown out. So de Rougemont, who wrote the book on the history of love, like me, says that we need to calm down this war between matter and spirit. The war that's going on in history is between matter and spirit. So that's the frontier of the peacemaking. And I think the Magdalene can say a lot about that. How we make peace in all dimensions of our being, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically even. I've talked about her in literature. In the medieval time, lots going on. In the different branches of Christianity, I'll rush over these. Each branch, Catholic, Orthodox, they have a slightly different take on the Magdalene. The Anglican tradition is doing work on the Magdalene as well, and Bruce Chilton has written a very good biography of her as an Anglican priest. He emphasises her role as an exorcist, and he says the Church needs to recontact its tradition of exorcism in a gentle way. She used oils, anointment, to kind of gently ease out the demons from people, which are their broken subpersonalities. And I've met an exorcist who works as a psychiatrist in London hospitals, using hypnotherapy to talk to the, wandering spirits that possess people and encourage them to leave, rather than forcing them out with bells and candles. We can have a slightly more mature approach to exorcism. So I think hypnotherapy and stuff, we need to gently tease out the demons. Luther himself believed that Mary Magdalene and Christ were married. He in the Protestant tradition, she was accepted as the bride of Christ, which is interesting. I'm not sure what Calvin had to make about it. I'm still working on that. But certainly Luther was happy. What influence does this have on historiography? One of the things Mary Magdalene forced us is to rethink what we mean by historiography. What is it to be a historian? some of the great contemporary Magdalene scholars say you can't study the Magdalene and remain neutral. This whole idea of being an objective historian, neutral in all matters, has got to go because we're embodied in the text. We're living the script. We're part of the story. And so the historian, instead of becoming an observer only, becomes a participant. And the story we tell, the narrative we frame, becomes either a redemptive narrative of use to us as living now, or it becomes an oppressive narrative that can be used to persecute and oppress people now. So we can't be neutral, as Howard Zinn and other historians have said. We have to take a stand, and the stand is for apocalyptic liberation and peace. That's the stand I take. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm opposed to the notion of the historian as the inquisitor who punishes people in the past and justifies violence that's happened. No, we have to unjustify it. The Templars are interesting. This is another, I think, cruel crime that was done. The trial against the Templars was bogus legally and morally, and the torture that was done to the Templars. They were innocent of the crimes they were charged with, I believe. Were they practicing some kind of Gnostic, esoteric understanding of sexuality? Possibly. Were they connected with the Magdalene Jesus tradition that was an oral tradition that had come down? Possibly. They were the guardians of the temple. Some people say the head they worshipped was the head of Mary Magdalene or John the Baptist. There's lots of mysteries with the Templars. I think they've had a raw deal from history, and there are historians working on the Templars at the moment. Barber's the great historian. I'm reading his book on the trial of the Templars at the moment, and it was shocking what was done to them. Scandalous, and they've never been officially pardoned or forgiven. And the trial of the Templars is still a sort of sore point. In France particularly, I think it was the consolidation of power of the French monarchy. But yes, I think they were the bearers of certain Gnostic wisdom. Another thing is the study in the Holy Land itself, because don't forget where she came from. I've been to the places, I've been to Magdala, I've been to Galilee, and when you physically go there, you get an amazing downrush of, the energy is still there. You can still, like the termers have been seeded there. And I would recommend everybody who comes to this event today, you should make a life pledge. Nicola and I went to the Sea of Galilee together, didn't we? And explored all around there. And it's just magical. But the vision I got there was the Golden Gate should be reopened, which has been blocked up because the Messiah's not here. I'm saying collectively the Messiah is here. If the Messiah isn't here in all of us, I don't know what the Messiah is. The Messiah was collectively in Mary and Jesus and the inner disciples. So this Golden Gate represents a blockage. It's been blocked up in the eastern wall of Jerusalem's Temple Mount. I'm saying reopen it, and let's all the spiritual leaders and elders of the world make a peace treaty, which I've written, and then we can fulfill and finally deliver on this mission that I think the Magdalene and Christ are involved with, and all the other initiates of history. Number 50, again, the politics of biblical scholarship. I mean, if I was giving this lecture at Harvard University, I'd probably be arrested afterwards, or I don't know. And people that do take the radical approach to Magdalene studies, are in a minority. I suppose I'm in a minority. Very few people are even connecting up the peace side. Peace studies are not taken seriously. So, to me, this is all wrong. It shows the corruption at the heart of academia. A lot of our universities are getting money from the military. They're doing research on mind control, on new weapons of mass destruction. These aren't, to me, true academics working in the tradition of the Muses. I work in the authentic academic tradition. And in my Global Green University, which I'm running from here, I believe this is authentic scholarship that we're trying to do, which is in the tradition of the Muses. And that's very much friendly to Mary Magdalene. Philosophical studies have been done, but not enough. I think that these were learned people. I don't think Mary Magdalene was an illiterate peasant woman. I don't think Jesus was an illiterate kind of country bumpkin. I think he was a learned man, and they both were, but in the higher mysticism of the day, which is still relevant to our needs now. Poetry is relevant. As a poet myself, I love poetics. There are some great poems about Mary Magdalene. John Donne dedicated one to his patron, Magdalene Herbert, and Magdalene Herbert is buried in Montgomery Church in Wales, near where I used to live. It's a great poem. So somebody should gather all the poems about Mary Magdalene from history. Indian links. Well, we're going to hear later today from someone who's attached to Indian spirituality. I am myself been to Jain, Buddhist, Hindu conferences and so on. The fact is that Capharnaum and that area was in touch with India. There was much more toing and froing. The empire, had links to Persia and on through to India. So the tradition of Christ going to India, it's not completely impossible. And then why did he send Thomas to India? Obviously they knew about India. The Thomas traditions in India. And the
His bones are in India.
this is one of the traditions that his bones are up there. So
They are. I can tell you a sat with them.
okay.
Amazing.
Okay, well, right. Okay, well, we'll hear later from that perspective. That's very exciting. But this is an important topic, number 53, in its own right. Question of psychoanalytical studies. I just mentioned this en passant. The relation, family history. Jesus never got away from the mother. The dominating mother of Mary, the mother of Jesus, was the big figure, according to the Gospels that we have. And she's the one that's revered in all the churches. If you go in, there's always, especially in Catholic Europe, there's always Mary, the mother of God, is very present, right? Now, to me, I see this as an over-dominating mother who wouldn't let the boy grow up and leave home, and who had to fulfill the mission, because according to the text, Mary, the Virgin, was brought up in the temple culture, innermost court, to give birth to the Messiah. This was the inner story she knew she had to do, ever since the angel told her as a young girl, she's going to have the Messiah. So she brought up baby Jesus to play the role, and she was not going to let anyone get in the way of that. So when Mary Magdalene comes into his life, threat, possible daughter-in-law, taking him off, opening his mind to bigger other pictures. So Mary the Virgin is going to get, so there was a tussle psychoanalytically. And so Christianity has never grown up from a Jungian perspective. We're stuck at the level of the boy that will not grow up and become a man and have his consort in his own family. We're still dominated by the heavy mother figure. Discuss. This is a psychoanalytical approach to the tension between Jesus, Mary the mother, and Mary the consort. It's an interesting question for studies.
You're assuming conflict.
Discuss. I'm just putting it out there, right? Maybe the relationship between Jesus the mother and Jesus the consort, Mary the mother and Mary the consort is a matter of great interest to me. And hopefully they made up. But, he had to die for that to happen, right? Discuss. Anyway, gender studies obviously is vital. Archaeological studies, we'll come to that a bit later, hopefully a bit. Might find her lost brooch, her lost memoirs. I still hope in a cave in Egypt somewhere, it's possible. Paleography, the study of ancient texts. Again, you need to be able to read these texts, and hopefully we'll find them. And of course Jesus studies is relevant, because Mary Magdalene, by looking at her in depth like we're doing, you're led back to look at Jesus, because they go together. So the whole question of Jesus studies is very vital. There's this Jesus seminar, which is a network of scholars looking at Jesus studies, interesting people. And, new things are being found out every day about his psychology and his mission and what he thought he was doing. Which leads us to transpersonal psychology, because that to me is the framework. In my thesis, I put forward this notion of transpersonal history. So how can we make sense of history unless we look at the many levels and bands that it's comprised of? And the Sephirot are embodied in each one of us from a Kabbalistic terminological perspective. So, simultaneously we're working on all frequencies, like a radio. It's tuned to one frequency, but it's also picking up on other stuff. We need to study this scientifically. We're all rainbow beings, as they were. The politics of Gnosticism and esotericism is interesting. Eric Voegelin he was a Roman Catholic scholar who wrote against Gnosticism. He said all modern political movements, like communism, fascism, all the rest, they're neo-Gnostic groups. And they're saying, we have the solution, we're going to impose it on you, and you're going to do what we say. Well, that's false Gnosticism. But he's a brilliant thinker, Voegelin, and other scholars have come along and say, yes, well then we need authentic Gnosticism, which is we work it out together. It's not like we have, the one group has the answer and imposes, like the Bolshevik party or the fascist party on the others. No, we work it out together. And together we make peace. And to me that's authentic esotericism, that's what Mary would want. The other field, and to me that's diagnostic. So we work as doctors, healers, and diagnosis means you come up with a solution to the illness. The world is suffering politically, things like Brexit, nobody knows what's going on. We need to do diagnostic tests on the patient, which is society, and heal it. Heresy and Inquisition studies, there's a huge field. Medieval scholars are writing huge amounts of work on this. You know, I've seen the scroll in the Vatican Secret Archive of the Templars Inquisition. Yeah, I mean, people have got to study the history of it, but I think they've got to go a bit further and work out the psychology of why they were doing it. And is it sadism, is it false thinking, you know, what? And then how did it become secularized? Because in the Communist Party, if you were the wrong kind of communist, I would torture you, you know, or if you were the wrong kind of Nazi or fascist, political heresy has replaced religious heresy. And I think we need to unheresize humanity. We're all heretics. We're all Magdalenians. And a true Jesus person is, by definition, a heretic. And all it means is free to choose. Heresis means choice. So I think, you know, let's choose freedom. Then there's the question of Essene studies, which is another field, very interesting. And the relationship of Mary, John the Baptist to the Essenes, that's a whole field in itself. And nearly the end, goddess studies, a field in its own right, unexplored, neglected. Nobody, very few people are doing goddess studies, but to do Mary Magdalene justice, we have to revive it. And the first philosophers and theologians were goddess people. Parmenides and Heraclitus and Pythagoras, the people that are my mentors. They worship the muses. And then in ancient Egypt, I talked about links to ancient India. There's also evidence of links to Egypt, and this is the Hermetic tradition. Did Mary Magdalene have links to Egypt? I think so, and with Christ as well. The Hermetic scriptures are very interesting. I'm doing a commentary on them at the moment. This is the psychoanalytical thing I talked about, 65. Question of prostitution, was she or wasn't she a prostitute? I've met people that are arguing for sex workers, as they called, should be legalised, the whole taint should be removed, and they regard her as a kind of patron saint.
What is the definition of prostitution?
Well,
at that time, what did it mean at that time?
That's a good question. That's a good question. But it was very much part of the Helleno-Greek-Roman world, and had been for centuries.
How we know it today. I don't think.
There were different forms as well. So there were different forms, but that, you know, the whole study of that is part of this.
You said that the word prostitute meant someone who worshipped a stranger religion.
Yes, but I think Thomas knows that.
Yeah.
And also prostitute in the past, in the Gnostic, for the patriarchal father, represent a Gnostic woman who speak. Because we have a testimony of a father of church who criticized how your wife are prostitute, but after he said, in fact, because they teach.
Yeah.
So
they
a
weren't
woman
allowed
who
to
teach is like a prostitute, so that could also significate the other link with non-completely Jewish traditional studies. So because in Jewish we have a different tradition.
Yeah. Now we're about to have a woman come and teach us now, so anyway, that's a whole field, and it's interesting. I personally think there were different kinds of, you know, people working with sexual energies, and in the temples of Aphrodite, I think the priestess, if you had needed sex therapy, right, what we now call sex therapy, you go to the temple of Aphrodite and talk to wise priestesses, and they would explain certain techniques and things. And I personally think we should reopen the temples of Aphrodite as places of learning about Eros in its highest form. Plato believed in what's called Aphrodite Urania, which is the highest form of Aphrodite. Aphrodite Pandemos is what kind of you do in the sex shops. I think Magdalene, Christ and so on were interested in Aphrodite Urania and setting people free from this.
And she also realised that she was in such a fascist society that if she had been a healer and maybe just even living on her own for a period of time, she could easily have been raped and then branded as a prostitute. As she, in this day and age, that would happen if you were in certain parts of India, that you were raped. You would then be branded as a prostitute.
Which is a terrible crime, and it tells us terribly, you know.
And vibrationally, you know, it would explain why a lot of people who've been through that kind of experience of sexual abuse actually can resonate very strongly with Mary Magdalene, but not with Christ or, you know,
yeah, even though Jane Scheberg argues that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was also the victim of rape and sexual abuse, and that's where Jesus came from. Yeah. In her book, the Jesus, the Illegitimate One. Anyway, the final point, 67, is the Thomas studies, which I'm interested in. I'm working on a dictionary of Thomas. And the links between the two. It's another part of the big jigsaw puzzle. And lastly, to finish, and I'm just finishing on time, the other thing it requires us to look at is revelation theory. Because if Mary Magdalene, her big claim to fame in history is she saw the risen Jesus. Well, what is that? What is post-mortem existence? How did she see that? And what is the risen Christ? Where is he now? Can we see him? How? Where is he? Discuss. Where do souls go after they die? This is what's called eschatology. So that's another part of the field of Mary Magdalene studies.
What does eschatology mean?
Well, it means the study of the last things. The last things. Eschaton is Greek for the ultimate question. So where does the soul go when you die? And also where do we, humanity as a whole, go when the whole planet dies? So these are big questions. I hope I've, in my whistle-stop tour through them all, I've given you food for thought, okay? We've looked at 68 different branches of learning. And that's my overview and my contribution to this conference.
Eagle.
So thank you so much for listening, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's your eagle, isn't it?
It's my eagle.